This is The Roadmap with Lee Heisman.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Roadmap, exclusively here on ASBN.com. I'm Lee Heisman, and every week we bring you some of the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs and business owners who are climbing the ladder, scaling their businesses, and thinking about how one day to exit stage left. Today we have a special guest, a great friend, Karen Robinson, founder and managing partner of Mara6. Karen, good to see you.
What a pleasure to see. Always so good to see you.
Unbelievable. Well, I will do my best to match your energy because I know I try to keep up with it. But talk about Mara6, talk about your history and your entrepreneurial journey.
Thanks, and thanks so much for having me here today. It's a beautiful day in Atlanta. I'm glad to be here. I've been married about 27 years, and my husband and I went to Africa on our honeymoon. And as you know, the Masai Mara, the Mara tribe and so forth is just a big part of Africa. And so when Rick and I started running companies many years ago, we thought Mara6 is a great landing point. That's what we love it. Our daughter's middle name is Alexandra Mara Cope.
It's wonderful. Well, great name, great history.
Thank you.
And let's talk, and you said you've been an entrepreneur now for 30 years.
Which I'm embarrassed to tell you because I must have started when I was 5.
Exactly. So go back a little bit, because 20 years ago, you raised $100 million for one of the businesses. Start talking about your history of fundraising, raising money for, not just fundraising, we'll get into that later, but raising money for businesses.
Absolutely. So when I first became a CEO, funny story, I was an executive with National Data Corporation. The CEO at the time said, Karen, I think you've wanted to be an entrepreneur, a CEO. I've got an opportunity. Why don't you come run this company or come be a sales exec? And I said, great, here's the deal. You don't have to pay me because I'm making more money than any person my age deserves to make. So here's the deal. Don't pay me anything, give me a lot of equity and give me a lot of commission. And he said, oh, this is a great deal. You know, I don't have to pay anything. We're a startup. I was there about 2 weeks and I said, I'm quitting. Don't put any more money in. I'll sell it all day long, that you will never be able to deliver it. He called me 2 weeks later, fired the CEO, and I became a CEO at the age of 30. So it was a crazy story.
So this is not something you'd recommend for other people?
I would not recommend it for everybody, but again,
fair.
It was a high risk, high reward.
So this was nearly 30 years ago.
Actually more than 30 years ago, which is kind of scary to think about. When I first became a CEO in Atlanta, I think there were a handful of us at most. There were a couple female CEOs of public companies, but I think I was one of the very first. In fact, entrepreneur, the word, was really not even recognized here in Atlanta. But I was blessed. I raised, again, a female. I raised literally $40 million in the period of about a couple months with 4 facts. I was literally a 30-second pitch. They talked about the elevator pitch. That was an elevator pitch. This is from the first floor to the 4th floor, 4 sentences, and I raised over $40 million.
So talk about the $100 million raise. Is that another one beyond that?
So there's a combination of a number of them. So yes, today it's not that unusual. But when you think about 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago in Atlanta, big numbers. Here's the thing I would say though. I think so often, I think I probably wore that as a badge of courage. Now when I speak or mentor entrepreneurs, I say, guys, it's not about how much money you raise. It's not about the sprint. It's the marathon. It's about how much you deliver, how much valuation, how much value you provide to customers and investors.
Because you travel the country speaking, you're a keynote speaker, and that's what I was going to ask. You took the words right out of my mouth. What are some of the valuable lessons that you provide entrepreneurs?
You know, one of the reasons I'm so open about talking is, first off, before it was cool, I talked about embracing failure. And now, again, that's vogue. But 30 years ago, when I talked about embracing failure, people weren't sure what to say. But again, if you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing the envelope. The second thing I say all along is I say, folks, you've got to be able to, it's a marathon. The highs and lows, that's why I'm a big believer in making sure your family's involved. They may not be involved in the business, but they need to understand what it takes, and they need to be all in with you. It's helpful to have a co-founder. I always say evaluate your investors. Don't let them just ask you questions. Think about it as a marriage. You need to ask them the questions and make sure there's compatibility. The other thing that I say that, again, big believer, many men that are in my audiences will ask me, so Karen, I have young daughters. What advice would you give me to give them? And I said, here's the number one. I'm a big believer in sports. Again, I played all through high school and college. The great thing about athletics, and when I was coming up, there weren't that many women. Now it's very common. But I say you learn to work hard, you learn to win, you learn to lose, and you learn teamwork. And again, those are the same characteristics I think that are so important for starting a business. I think the last thing I would say is, again, it's important to understand, and this is a funny story. I ran a battery charging company. And to this day, I cannot tell you the difference between voltage and current. And yet, that's another company I raised a lot of money for. Why do I talk about that story? Because people don't buy voltage or current. They buy solutions. And so if you can understand, and no matter how complex your technology, if you can say, how will this help somebody? How will this solve a problem? How will it solve a big problem? Then you're onto something.
Because you've judged awards, the prestigious awards like the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year. Pardon me.
Correct.
You actually are the judge doing all of
Correct.
this for the people to determine who is the entrepreneur. What are the qualities you're looking for that kind of person?
Great. So I think first and foremost is integrity. You know, in this day and age, it's so important, and that's not one you normally think about. But integrity is at the top of the list.
How do you judge that? How do you? I know it's a
Great
catch-all
question.
word. Great comment. I agree with you actually, and I would say that I use my gut to
Yes.
judge integrity. But you can't be doing that as you're judging that.
That's a part of it. Part of it is just, again, the stories they tell. If it's a we or an I, that's a big issue. We versus I. Talk about, again, when people talk about the things they've done for other people, the things that, again, part of the team succeeded, you know it. I do reference checks. Again, quite often you just talk to the individual, but it's so important to talk about the people that have been around them.
So let me ask you a question. The reference checks are important because you've always heard this. If someone's giving references,
Right.
you think they're paying that person, they're making sure
Correct.
that they're going to give. I mean, you know you're getting a list of references. Do you always use the references that the people give you, or do you use others?
That's a great question, too. That's a great comment. And again, what you need to do, that's when you need to do your homework. Who have they talked to? Who are some customers? Or one of the things I always ask is, tell me a customer that didn't work out. Because again, everybody gives you the ones that and there's many great love stories, but let's find the ones that maybe did not work and why, and ask them why. And again, even when you're a startup, and you know this, when you're in a startup, there's going to be some big blunders. There's going to be some failures. And I think so much of an entrepreneur is how they recover, how they deal with that failure. Again, what I've said, and again, I was many years ago, I was on the front page of the AJC and said, Karen loves failure. And I thought, not sure I wanted that on the cover, but it went to the story, which is, again, when you have a failure, A, that means you're pushing hard. B, what do you do? And how you respond to that really shows what kind of an entrepreneur. A, do you sit down and take a moment, just like a death? Do you take a moment and just think about it, reflect on it? Then you need to think about, okay, how did I cause that? What influences did I do that made that fail? What could I have done differently? And then recognize sometimes things are outside of your control. One of my companies, and this is another funny story, but it was back in the infamous 2000 crash. Or 2001, and again, we had done the road show. We had a $1.7 billion, I believe it was, market cap. We had all the big boys going into the private jet from place to place doing your road show. And if you remember March of 2001,
yep.
So let's just say that my husband put those brochures about the private jet away, and we got on Delta again.
Fair. So you've been through it all, the highs,
the lows, yeah.
So you and your husband, Rick Cope, are a power couple in the Atlanta area. There's no question. If for viewers and listeners out there, if you know the Atlanta area, I mean, not only your reputation across the country, but also in this region, you guys are a power couple. But it started with you, and we have a mutual friend that I have some inside information, and I have to ask some personal questions.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about human resources and the way that things work at your organization.
Right.
Should you have relationships with people that you work with? Because is that the way that you meet your husband? Tell that story.
Funny story. So a very, very funny story. So my husband was running a fuel cell company up in New Jersey, and I was running a battery charging company here. And we started getting serious, and we realized we could be in two separate places, running two separate companies, and have very little time together or to talk about anything. So he sold his company, quit, came down, and we were looking for a CTO. And so my board said, well, why don't, Rick is a great candidate. And Rick said, well, I'm going to marry the boss. If you don't have a problem, I don't have a problem. So funny. So he actually, for the first 4 years of our marriage, he worked for me. a really other funny story, which sort of dates.
Do you ever hang that over his head that he worked for you at one juncture?
He says all the time, and you know, Rick. He
course.
says all the time. I work for her all the time.
So fair point.
Even if she works for me, I work for her.
Fair.
Funny story though. Another one, and this shows again aging myself. But back in the day when they would give out paper paychecks. So my husband was a CTO. He was in the back of the building. I was with the executives in the front of the building, and the assistant EA came around and was giving paychecks. And Rick said, "Well, can you give me Karen's?" And she said, "Yeah, you wish." And he said, "No, I'm married to her." And she said, "Yeah, you wish." He said, "Follow me." Walked to the front of the building, kissed me, and said, "Now can I have her paycheck?"
That's brilliant. I love it. And I knew that story.
You knew that story.
So for most people watching this, they're going to think, look at your energy level, look at all the success that you've had. But it didn't start there.
Right.
And, people don't realize the true grind sometimes of how you get to where you get to. Talk about being a maid.
Yeah. Oh, funny story. So.
Yeah, and again, this is our good friend Jody.
This is our good friend Jody,
obviously
who's
sharing this information about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Funny story. So again. When I graduated, or when I was in high school, and I was a big school, football homecoming queen, student body president, but the only job I could find was a maid. And it wasn't a maid at the Ritz-Carlton, it was a maid at Motel 6. So I say that story as well, because again, nobody ever would have thought, I would have never thought that, 20 years later, I'd be running, large corporations.
Well, did you learn anything being a maid for Motel 6?
Oh, yeah, I tell you, people are dirty.
That's really funny. You mean that in a literal sense, not when we were talking about the quality of someone and realizing that.
No. Again, hardworking people, and the other thing I think I learned, not only from my travels overseas, but particularly I have a real affinity toward Africa, but I found that people, whether they're checking in at the Motel 6 or whether they're a Maasai tribesman, or whether they're, one of my employees, that we all want the same thing. We want a better life for our kids. We want to be able to spend time with our families, the people we love, and give back. And when you realize that, it's so easy to be able to, what's the word I'm looking for, to bring people together. So one of the things I always tell, again, especially when I'm giving speeches to entrepreneurs that are a little later in their career, I said, guys, you've been blessed. Your job is to give back. So you need to find, and I don't care what stage you're in, and that doesn't necessarily mean money. It means, there's every single day there's something you can do to give back to your community, to your school, to your larger community, or even in my case, to Africa or India or South America.
Well, I wanted to go into your upbringing because you were raised in Singapore,
yes.
Taiwan, Korea.
Yes.
Before we talk about giving back, because we'll obviously talk
yes.
about, I want to make sure we bring up the book. Talk about being raised in these places.
What a great experience. I spent literally most of my, from 0 to 20 overseas. And great story. I think one of the things, and again, when I was doing, this was in the 70s, when we were living overseas, there weren't, it was not like it is today. When you would go even to Europe, it was European, not Americanized Europe. So a great experience. My parents, because he worked with Litton Industries, my parents every summer came home. They would turn in their business class tickets, get the cheapest tickets they could find, which allowed us to go. We were in Moscow in the 70s. We were in Kashmir in the early 80s. India, Delhi, Bangladesh, around the world, Moscow. Great experience.
Did it change you in any way, having that experience?
Absolutely.
Do you recommend for
absolutely.
entrepreneurs or people to travel to get that experience,
absolutely.
giving them a vantage point? What do you think was the most valuable
I think there's
piece
three
of
things.
that?
I think number one is you realize that people are the same overall, as I said earlier. The second thing you realize is we all have a common language. And again, if you just try, listen, speak, you can communicate. And the third thing that I realize is take risk. When, again, so often, I could give you story after story, when we were, again, in Moscow and I lost my contact lenses in Goom's department store, and all these Russians who didn't speak language were all on their hands and knees trying to find my contact lens.
Oh my gosh.
A fascinating story. So again, that's, I think, one of the reasons which has made me a good entrepreneur, is that there's the ability to connect, also the ability to understand, and the ability to get people to work together.
Yeah, now there's no question you embody all
Thank
of these
you.
things. You talked about giving back, and
Yes.
as we wrap up, time flies.
Yes.
Talk about the book. Pull this out if you don't mind.
I would love to. And again, you and I, Lee, have been so blessed. We live in the greatest country in the world. We live in a wonderful community. We have friends, we have family, you name it. But one of the things I realized, and I think because living overseas, I realized many years ago that the happiness and the most value is by giving back. And so started out, I've been on the boards around the world for Opportunity International, which is the largest faith-based. 1 year alone, we gave $1 billion in loans. The average loan size is $168, and 94% went to women and 94% paid back.
Wow.
Amazing stories. Most recently, I've become very excited about our good friend Bruce Keenan.
Yep.
He and his wife started a charity in Himalaya in Nepal about 25 years ago. And I wanted to give you this book because this is a terrific book that my daughter helped put together. My daughter's 22, put together a book about the children, the orphans in the Himalayas, in Nepal. And every year, I encourage all your listeners to consider donating and giving to it.
That's
one of the charities.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful.
Thank you. One of the charities I'm very excited about.
Where would people go to make a donation, by the way, for this?
The HCC.org. HimalayanChildren'sCharities.org, and I'll be more than happy to provide that information.
We're going to have to get some of the photos from your daughter in
We'd
this.
love to do that.
Let's
We'd love
make
to.
sure.
The other last thing I'll say is the other thing that I've just become so passionate about is helping entrepreneurs. And so right now I'm an investor in about a dozen companies. I'm on the board of about 6 of them. 4 of them, no more than that. 4 of the companies I'm on the board of, they're either a person of color or a woman. So I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk.
Yes, you do.
One of our good friends, Jody, we've started a pickleball company up at Patriot Place 11-0, and so we invite you all to come up and play pickleball with us. There's another one that I've done with Keith Marshall and Aaron Murray called the Players Lounge, and they were talking about helping athletes find their voice in college sports. I could go on, but again, it's absolutely love my charity work, my philanthropy, and I love giving back to entrepreneurs.
So I do have one important question as we wrap up.
Yes.
And I'm not sure, I didn't prepare you for this one, but with everything you're doing, I need to know how exactly do you stretch time? Because there's no way you get all this done 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. This just doesn't seem like there's enough time in the day for you.
I need to work on that. That's my goal for 2025, is to think better. Again, I think one thing is when I'm here, I'm here. And when I'm with my daughter, I'm with my daughter. And when with my husband, I'm with my husband. My 91-year-old mother, who you would love, is when I'm with her, when I take her to lunch, I listen to the stories. I listen to everything she has to say. I'm 100% there. So one of them is being in the moment, not trying to not when I'm with you, checking my phone and everything else. And I think the other thing is I've learned to say no. Need to do better at that, learn to say no. And a little bit better at trying to schedule better. But yeah, it's difficult, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
So look, that is true. When we're together, you are completely engaged.
100% you.
So for people that might even want to reach out to you, what's the best way? LinkedIn, an email, a website? What's the best way?
Great question. And I'd be, when I started out as an entrepreneur, there was nobody to help me. And so I am so about what can I do to help. Best is probably LinkedIn or my email at krobinson@mara6.com. Give me patience. I'm on my way to Vietnam and Thailand in 2 weeks, and so I'm going to do both some philanthropy and some business and a little vacation while I'm there.
Absolutely.
Give me time, but I'd be delighted to get back to you and see if I can help in any way.
Karen, you did not disappoint. This is exactly what I would get. This is spectacular. I had a front row seat to this amazing day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Karen, thank you again today.
You're my hero, buddy.
You took the time here today. I hope this show was as insightful for you as it was for me. We hope to see you again next week for another episode of The Roadmap.
Thanks for watching The Roadmap with Lee Heisman.